Thanks everybody for coming today. I hope you guys enjoyed the opening presentation. I know I got to see most of it. Amy and Jamie do a great job of presenting, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. So I'm Paul Stewart. I'm with Gerrie Electric. I'm in the Gerrie Electric Process Group, and I've got Steve Berger with me from Rockwell Automation. We're going to do co-present on this presentation. So I'm going to handle the first few minutes, and then I'm going to hand it over to Steve. So we're going to take a look at the spectrum of change management. So if we take a look at change management, I mean it's a big topic. There's a lot of pieces to it. So what we look at in change management, hey, program changes. What changed and who changed it? I mean, we all know when we come into a plant and there's a problem, nobody changed anything. I didn't change anything, right? I didn't touch anything, but something has changed, right? Will some of these changes that you make, somebody makes a tweak in the controller or something, hey, you don't notice the change right away, but 12 hours from now, a day from now, product quality starts to change, and then you got to start to put the pieces together and say, hey, what changed? What happens if I download the wrong program into my controller, right? I thought that was the latest. I didn't realize somebody made a change 2 days ago. I was on my laptop, and all the changes that I've made previous are now gone. Okay, so how do I handle these things now? And it comes down, who has the latest programs, right? Do you guys have a central place where they're archived? Are you relying on the memory stick around the neck? You just hand it off to the next shift guy and that's the latest program, but is there 3 laptops with what you think is the same program, right? And then, hey, what if I lose my data and configuration? How do I get it back? And what is your disaster recovery plan if something does happen and you lose a device and you have no configuration? Okay, so that's really what we're going to focus on the change management aspect on a control system side. Okay, so there are plant-wide change management, right? When I look at a facility and there's lots of assets out there, there's controllers and valves and drives and robots, there's a lot of things, and there's software that covers the large spectrum of the change management in a plan, and we're going to touch on that, and that's where Steve's going to take a look at. But what happens if I don't have that, or I'm an OEM and I just produce this one skid and I'm putting it into a plant and I'm responsible for that. I need to know what's going on with my machine, or I don't have a plant-wide system and there's one machine that's causing me a lot of problems, and I can't justify the expense of a large plant-wide asset tracking system. What can I do, right? Or I have a remote system standing by itself. There's no connectivity to a plant. It's a controller and a panel view, and I need to know what's going on with that, what has changed, or if anybody's changed anything. Okay, so what we're going to look at is starting on the small scale. Okay, what can I do today? These are things that have been available for a long time that maybe some of you guys aren't aware of. I can see some familiar faces here. I know we've got some integrators and some end users. And so these are tools that exist now that probably you guys can start to utilize right away. So change detection on the controller level. So controller logging. Okay, that's not something that's new. That's something that's been around for a little while, but it came out in version 20 of Logix and on the new controller platform. So there's some internal memory that is dedicated to that controller, allocated in there, specifically just to log some information from the controller. Okay, so you don't need separate auditing software. I can start to check out what's going on in my controller, and the information's there. Okay, so it'll store entries into a removable media. Okay, so and as the firmware versions of Logix has increased, some of this functionality on the information I get out of the controller has increased. So I get a little bit more information as the firmware levels have gone up. Okay. So the way it works, so the controller will log 100 log entries. Okay, it's buffered in its internal memory. Okay, so changes like project downloads, online edits, mode changes, downloads, tag values changed. So if you look at like version 30 and above, you can really get granular on values of tags that have changed. Okay, somebody's turned forces on, somebody's turned forces off, that type of thing. Okay, that stuff automatically gets logged in the controller, and it's a circular buffer, so it'll log 100 entries, and it'll just keep populating. So now how do I get that data? I want that data. That's critical to me, right? So I can set because a lot of the newer controllers will ship automatically now with an SD card in them. There's a slot there and a 1 gig SD card. So I can set my controller now to automatically take that buffer when it's 80% full and dump it to that SD card. So that information sits on that SD card, okay? Or I can write a message instruction to say, I want that information, write it to that SD card, okay? So what'll happen is it'll start to populate, but if I do a firmware upgrade or something like that, I'm about to dump new firmware into that controller, I don't want to lose that internal buffer. I can say, okay, I'm going to clear that internal memory, get it onto the SD card so I have it, and then I'll do a flash, okay? And then I can start to set up and detect, okay, what do I want to detect with changes, okay? So I've got, in my controller properties, there's some configuration that can be done, and it's like a mask. It actually is a mask that you can set up. So you can go into the configuration, and you click on that, and then there's some checkboxes there that say, hey, what am I really looking for? By default, everything is on, right? I/O forces, firmware updates, everything. But if I'm only focused in on a few little things that I just want to make sure nothing changes in these few parameters, I would set that mask. And then what happens is an audit value gets created in the controller, and it's a unique number, okay? So I can just jot that number down, log it in my book, report. I can display it on HMI. I can have a maintenance screen, something. I can get at that value, okay? So now what happens is if something changes within what I have selected, that audit number changes, okay? The information gets logged, but that audit number changes. So I can easily go up if I'm in a remote location and I see, and somebody says nothing changes, and I look at my audit value and go, well, something has changed. I know it has changed because that number is different. Let me take a look at my SD card, pop out the SD card, put it into my computer, and I can start to find out what has changed. Okay, it's almost like I kind of refer to almost like a safety signature. When you do safety controllers, it's locked and there's a safety signature. And nothing's changed, but that signature tells me something has changed. Okay? So where is this? What controllers support this? Like I said, so this came available in version 20 and above. So any of the ControlLogix controllers, L7s and 8s, they have SD cards, they come with that. CompactLogix controllers, anything in the 5370 series of controllers, so the newer processors, the L1, 2, and 3 controllers have this feature built into them. And again, with the 5380 controllers. Okay, so what controllers are not supported? So if I've got some old L60s or some of the older CompactLogix controls, L32s and 35s, that feature isn't supported in those controllers. Okay. So I can take that SD card, put it in my computer, and it's stored in a TSV file. So I can open up in a notepad or if you really want to, or you can put it into an Excel. And you can start to see, and it'll log time. It'll start to tell you information as to what has changed, say what values have changed. So I've got all this information. Now, it won't tell you exactly somebody made a change to this, went into this routine, added this rung, changed. It'll just tell you, hey, something in that rung or something in that program has changed. Somebody's made an online edit. I don't know what it is. Okay, so that kind of a piece to the puzzle, right? So now what can I do to figure out, all right, somebody made a change to that code. What did they change last night? Okay? So there's a tool that's available, and it's not something new, but it's been around for a while, and it's just been enhanced over the years. So there's the Logic Design and Compare tool. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that tool, but it's a free download from Rockwell. So what I do is I take my controller code, upload it, save it, and then I take my last known copy of the program before the previous night or whatever. I've got to compare these two. So I can open up this tool, and I set them up, and I say, left side is this program, the right side is this program, and compare them. Okay, now you can set filters, you can get really granular into specific tag values if you want. Some of that, like I said, that product has kind of evolved over the years, so if you haven't used it for a while and you download the newest one, you'll see a few more features. But it'll start to tell me, hey, there's tag differences, there's ladder differences, something has changed, and it'll start to point me in those directions. Okay, so I can come in and look at tags, right? Anything red? Well, it doesn't exist on the one side it did. Did somebody create some new tags? Did these tag values change? Okay, hey, wait a minute, somebody added that rung of logic here that wasn't there before in that routine. Okay, somebody made a change to an output module, changed an RPI time, changed some functionality within that module for some reason. Somebody's made a change compared to those two programs. Okay, so then I can generate a report. So I can generate a PDF that kind of highlights everything and spits it out into a PDF, and I can document that, or I can use that report. Okay? So that's on the controller level. Okay? So now what about HMI information and audit? Okay? So has anybody here heard of Factory Talk Diagnostics? That term that's been around, or has anybody used it? Okay? It's a tool that's there. I find there's a lot of people that I've heard of it, or they don't really know what it does or how it does. What can I use it for? Okay, it's diagnostics, right? So what is Factory Talk Diagnostics? Well, it's installed as part of the service platform from Rockwell. So when you install that services platform, if you've ever installed Rockwell software, Activation Manager, all that stuff that goes along with it, there's a piece, Factory Talk Diagnostics, that gets installed. And the purpose of that is, hey, it starts to help you answer the question, why did that happen in my HMI? What's going on? It gives you some tools to start to dive into it. So it'll record and send errors, warnings, information, and audits to a local log. Okay? So a lot of different Rockwell software packages have built-in features to send different type of information to a Factory Talk Diagnostics. Okay? So by default, it gets loaded. You can load it. By default, it's whatever PC you've loaded, it's going to log it to that PC. Okay, so I could also, if I want to, put a central ODBC database and log it to, if I have a distributed HMI system and I want everything to send all its messages back to one central to make my life a little easier, then I don't have to go to each PC and look at the diagnostics from that. You could do that as well. Okay, so there's some message routing and there's some setup that you can start to say, okay, what information do I want to see in this log that will help me? Okay. So I can go up through the administration console and I can set up, so what Rockwell has defined as some severities, okay, and then there's some different type of audiences. So they look at operator, engineer, developer, okay, so these are the types of information maybe that an operator wants to see for some diagnostics, but I can start to get a little more granular as I go. Okay, and then I can look at errors, warnings, I can look at information. You start to choose what you want to see in this diagnostic log. And hey, where do I want it displayed, right? So there's a Factory Talk View diagnostic list. When you run a Factory Talk View SE, you can choose on your client to have that display at the bottom if you want. So that's one place where you can display some messages. But there's also the local log. So I can log it to the local and then use that information. So hey, I may only want operators to see along that bottom just a few warnings, just to get them to go, hey, I see something. And then as a developer or an engineer, the local log has got a lot more information for me to see, okay, what's going on here, okay? So what I find is, hey, the farther I go down that list, operator, engineer, developer, the more granular, the more detail I'm going to get in my logs, okay? And then the farther I go over error, warning. So errors, hey, I've got a problem, I can't talk to a controller. Warning, something's kind of out of the norm, but then information and audit is where I'm going to start to get a little bit more granular. Okay, so if I want to see tag values that have changed, who changed that tag value? I'm going to want to start to look at developer and information is where I'm going to want to. Now you can check all of those and you'll get a lot of information. And what you can do is go to that information and look, and it'll actually tell you in the details, hey, that's an operator information. You can start to go, okay, I don't really want to see these. I'm cluttering up my log with useless things. I can kind of granularly get in and take a look at things. Now, if I'm specifically looking at audit values and audit, I need to do that for certain industries. Steve's going to touch a little bit more on that when we look into more of a plant-wide. But if I'm going to deploy something like a Factory Talk Asset Center and there's some specific information that's deemed as audit logs, Factory Talk Asset Center will capture those and put them into a log, and then you'll be able to do detailed audit logs out of that, okay? So, no, great, I got all this information, but how can I view it, right? Well, there's a Factory Talk Diagnostic Viewer that gets installed as well, okay? But actually, in version 11 of SE, there's actually a Diagnostic Viewer. So you actually, in your HMI, can get a window into that log. And you can set up a maintenance screen for yourself. If I log in, hey, maybe I look at that audit value in the controller and go, oh, well, that's changed from last time. And let me take a look at my diagnostics log and just to kind of figure out what's happened in the last little bit. Okay? So that's like on a FactoryTalk View SE or a PC-based HMI. But what if I have a panel view? Okay? What if I just have a system with a controller and a panel view? What can I do there? Okay? So for panel view plus is panel view plus 6s and 7s. Okay? On version 10 and higher, a feature's been introduced on onboard audit. Okay, so I can set up my panel view to capture audit logs and export to CSV. Okay, so it's set up in there. You can just set up your log entries. You can set capacity warnings when that log is starting to get full, and then I can take that information and I can view it on the HMI, or I can set up. There's a CSV export tool. So I can export that to an SD card, a USB, or local hard drive on that. And then I can pull that out in Excel and see what has changed. Okay, I can trigger that from an HMI. I can look at audit, alarm, and diagnostic information from a panel view. Okay, so we've looked at, on the small scale controller logging, some compare on the programs, some diagnostics and onboard panel views. Again, now these are all manual processes for retrieving and reviewing data or small skids. Okay, but what if I have a plant-wide system? I don't really want to be doing that for all my systems, okay? So I've got a lot of assets out there, and well, how do I simplify this or automate this? Okay, and that's where I'm going to hand it over to Steve on the larger plant scale side. Okay.
Thanks, Paul. All right, so a lot of things Paul talked about, they're great, they're built in, and if you're a machine builder, that might be useful to you. But what happens if you have, you're working in a large plant and you have 100 controllers, right? You don't want to have to go to each controller, pull out an SD card, pop it into your laptop and analyze a text file and so on. We want to have something else that makes it a lot easier for us to work with these things. So that's where FactoryTalk Asset Center comes in. So in general, why do you need an asset center solution, right? Well, as I just said, like if you have a lot of items in your plant, hundreds, even thousands, what do we have in common here with all these? Whether it's a PLC, an HMI, a drive, a motor overload, everything has a configuration file associated with it, right? And as the number of devices builds and builds, it becomes more difficult to manage all those configuration files. Paul mentioned, like, okay, where are these stored? Maybe there is a file share somewhere. But is everybody being meticulous and doing backups when they make changes, putting it on the share? Is there a log they're supposed to write down what changes they made? So that's where it can quickly get out of control. So that's where Asset Center can come in handy here. There's certain types of scenarios you'll encounter in day-to-day operations. The big one would be a device loses its configuration for some reason. The controller faults, dumps its config. Now what, right? Or a controller fails or a drive fails. Yeah, you have a replacement on the shelf, but now you got to get the configuration file, right? So that's one issue you'll see a lot. And of course, these things usually happen late at night or on a weekend or something, and it can be very inconvenient. The maintenance person on duty's got a lot of pressure. He's got to get the line up and running, and he's running around trying to find a file. You also have situations where it's not necessarily a 911 call, but just production environment change. So maybe you make various products throughout the year, each quarter or whatever, semi-annual, you have a shutdown for a week, and you do some retooling on the line, and you have to change some configuration files have to change, right? Do you have handy, ready to go, files for product B? Does somebody know where those are from the last time you ran it, and so on? And then, of course, always worried about unauthorized or undocumented changes, right? So probably the more common would be undocumented, right? Somebody, has to go get something fixed. They don't have any ill intent. They fully intend to back up the file when they're done and log the changes, but they just get busy, right? They get called to another problem in the plant, and they never get back to the original problem and make the proper backups, right? And then you could also have issues where maybe you have a disgruntled employee or somebody who wants to actually do damage, right, and go on a controller. So you have unauthorized access. So these are kind of major problems you can face. And so how can Asset Center help with that? And of course, here, just the obvious, right? What are the results of all those different issues, right? It's just costly downtime, right? Any lost money is bad, right? So even here it says, okay, 76% of customers, 1 hour of downtime costs between $1,000 and $10,000. Well, you know, some people might say, well, compared to $1 million, that's nothing. But if you're the owner of the plant or you're a shareholder of that company, you know, even $1,000 or $10,000 out the window unnecessarily is a bad thing, right? So we want to make sure we try to keep this all to a minimum. So what is this Factory Talk Asset Center? So Asset Center can help us address some of those issues. It has some main functions. Number one would be this archive and disaster recovery. So the main thing is centrally manage electronic files, and it can be any electronic file, right? So it could be an ACD file for a controller, it could be a PDF file, right? We have customers who use it to store procedures, manuals, all kinds of things on there, right? So you have a central database where all the files are located. If people want to use them, they have to check the file out, check the file back in when they're done, and then that way you'll have a full record of who has what. The person going in there always knows they're going to get the latest version of the file. Another thing we want to do, have the ability to do, is automate the backup of those assets, right? So if I have my controllers, do you have a procedure in place right now where, you know, you back up your controllers on a regular basis? You know, do you always do it, you know, religiously, every week, every night, whatever? Asset Center can do that automatically for us, right? So we can set a schedule where the Asset Center system will go out at a specified time, whatever you set it for, and it's going to do the backup. So it'll go upload the configuration file from the controller or the drive. It'll get a copy of the master file from the database. It'll do a compare in the background. It'll generate a report if there's any differences, and it'll email that report to whoever you decide. You know, any individuals or groups of individuals, you can do that. Second big one is the audits, right? So Paul talked about the audits that are available on the logs, the Diagnostic Viewer or within the controller. All the various Factory Talk pieces of software all generate audits, so the Studio 5000, Factory Talk View SE, ME, and so on. Those products generate the audits. So it's not actually Asset Center that generates them, it's the individual products. Asset Center just collects them all and stores them in a central database and then makes them available to you for use. So you can go in, do ad hoc searches on the database. So if you just want to see something happened, I can quickly go in, filter based on a certain controller, a certain individual, and see all the activity related to that. I can schedule searches. So maybe every shift, I schedule a search on a certain controller just to see all the activity on that controller for the day, right? So whatever you need to do, we can do that with Asset Center. And then there's the security aspect. So there's kind of two parts to this. A lot of people think you need Asset Center to, you know, secure your assets like your controllers. So that's not necessarily the case. So our products have built into it Factory Talk security. So if you have Control Logics or you have Factory Talk View SE, you actually have Factory Talk security available to you. You can configure that in your administration console, and that's where you can set up your users, user groups, set up access to individual controllers who can go online with it, who can download to it, who can make changes, who can create routines. It can get very granular, the security that you can set up on that. Asset Center kind of builds on top of that Factory Talk security. So we can set up on the Asset Center database who can actually check files in or out. We can actually set up who can actually even see the files. So maybe if somebody's responsible for a certain section of the plant, you know, somebody just looks after the paint shop, whatever it is, we can set it up so they can't even see the other assets in the plant, right? We don't want them to concern themselves with it. They just see what they need to see. So that can all be done with Asset Center. Then the last part, the extensibility. What about third-party products, right? So that's great if you have Rockwell controllers and all that. But what about if I have somebody else's controller? Can I use Asset Center with that? So the short answer is yes. So as I mentioned, any electronic file can be stored in the Asset Center database, and you can do the version control, checking in, checking out, and so on. So whether you have an Omron controller, Schneider, or so on, it'll work with Asset Center. Now the next part is, can I do that disaster recovery part? I want to automate the backup of those devices. So the answer to that is it depends. It depends on the third-party device. So we do have, say, for Siemens controllers, S7, S5, but if you have, say, an Omron controller or Schneider, it depends if they have a utility or not to do backups, right? So we have a custom device plugin for Asset Center that can be used, and it can basically, it basically executes scripts. So if they have a backup tool, particularly one that can run from a command line, then there's pretty good chance we can use our custom device plugin to automate that backup process. Even if they don't, we do also support something called Audit. It's kind of a scripting language to automate keystrokes and mouse clicks and so on. So you could actually simulate the process of opening their configuration software, whatever it may be, uploading the file, saving it. We can automate that with Audit. What does the software look like? So Asset Center itself is made up of three main parts. So there's the Asset Center server, which is kind of the quarterback, manages all the systems. Then there's the Asset Center client. That's kind of the GUI interface to the Asset Center server where you do your configuration, view the logs, set up your schedules, and so on. Then there's the Asset Center agent. And the agent does kind of all the work. So when you set up disaster recovery operations, like a backup and compare operation, it's actually the agent that goes out and does the work, does the upload, retrieves the master file from the database, does the compare in the background. So depending on the size of your plant, this could all be on one box, or in my case, a virtual machine. I've got everything installed all on one. Or if you're in a larger plant, then chances are you're going to have that spread out among multiple machines. So you might have an Asset Center server. You could have the SQL Server database on a separate machine, or it could be on the same one as the server. You have multiple clients, multiple agents, right? It all depends. How many assets do you have? How often do you want to service those assets? And from then, we can determine how many agents you're going to need in your system. So now what I want to do is just kind of a basic demo here where I want to run through some different scenarios and show you how Asset Center can be used to address those. And what I'm going to, just going to change the resolution here because if I leave it at high def, you won't be able to see anything beyond the second row. Yeah, there we go. Still not. All right, so the first scenario would be kind of the most common, which is just, you just have to make general day-to-day changes to a PLC out on the line, or maybe, PLC's lost its configuration, you just have to go download the latest config to it. So, how would that look like? So the person on duty, maintenance personnel, they would just go and they could go to a computer that has the Asset Center client installed on it. As long as it's on the network with connectivity to your end device, this computer could be anywhere in the plant. And the first thing you're going to notice is on the left side here, there's what we call the asset tree. So this is how you'll kind of set up all your different assets. There's no one correct way to do this. I've done it just by device type for demo purposes. Realistically, in a plant setting, you're probably going to do it by functional area. So, paint shop, machine A, machine B, whatever. And then within those folders, you would have the assets related to that. And that helps for different things in terms of setting up scheduling, and also for access to those devices. So if somebody only is supposed to look at machines A, B, and C, you can set security up for that easily if you've got the folder structure set up correctly. So in our case, let's say a person comes in here, I have this L85 controller, this file here, and let's say that's the one that I want to make some changes to. So I go open up my archive tab. Now because I've changed the resolution, I'm going to have to do some scrolling here, but the first thing you'll see when I open up that tab is all the versions that are stored in the Asset Center database related to this file. So here I'm at version 22 right now. That was put in today. Comments, added some code. You would put something a little more detailed. And it goes all the way back to version 1. So there's actually 22 copies of the files stored in the Asset Center database. Right? So you might say, if you're coming on duty, you might say, well, what's the difference between this one, or 22 and 14, and so on? We can quickly check that by just right-clicking on 2 different files, and it'll run that compare tool Paul talked about. It just runs that in the background, and we can kind of quickly see the differences between any 2 files in the archive. Of course, I picked 2 that had no differences. But it would show, just like Paul showed, there'll be differences on there, and they'll show up there. So let's save that. So you can do that with any 2 files, just right-click. So now the person comes on, they need to check the file out. So there's various ways to check a file out. I'll just go to the most basic here. They just click on the file, do this checkout. You could put some comments in while you're checking the file out, and it's going to get a local copy and put it on my client station. So as soon as I check it out, you'll see here now a little checkbox shows up. Tells me the file was checked out by what user and on what computer. So anybody else who goes on now, say on another client, and if they want to access that file, they're going to see it's checked out, and they will not be able to check it out. So only one person can ever check a file out for editing at one time, right? You can get a local copy, like just a read-only. If you just need to look at something or whatever, you can do that. But only one person can check out an editable file at one time. Yep.
Sorry, if one person checks out a file, the second person tries to access it, can they still access a read-only version of it?
Yeah, that was, I'll just show you quickly here. So if I say it's checked out and I go to do it again, it's not going to, okay, because I'm on the same computer. You would get one that the checkout would be grayed out, but there's another thing called get, and get is getting a read-only copy of it. Get this out here. You already have it open. Okay. So once you have it open, you do with whatever you need to do. If you want to make some offline changes, then download to the controller, you can do that. Or you can go online with the controller, make your changes. If it's a situation where you've lost the file in the online controller, you just need to download, you can do that as well. I'll just go on here and make a very basic change. Commit the change. So once I've gone in here and I've done whatever I need to do, make my changes, save the file. Yes. Now I want to check the file back in. So there's various ways to check a file in. The most basic is if I just close this off, this check-in box pops up, right? So what I want to do is I want to check the file in, and then I'm just going to delete that local copy. And I'll just say here, added AFI. To rung 0, wherever it was, doesn't matter. Say okay. What was the other one? So now it's checked in the file. See, that's gone. It's checked back in. Here's a new version's been created, 23, and it shows the comments. Added rung 0. It tells me who did it, which user, and so on. So now it's free. Anybody else can now go log that out, check that file out. What about the situation, though, where there's, we call an undocumented change? So Asset Center itself, I can set the security up, who can check files in or out. But if I want to actually control who can go online with a controller and stuff, that's actually the factory talk security I have to set up. So right now, there's nothing stopping somebody else from going online with a controller if they have, Studio 5000 installed, right? So, for example, resolution. Where'd my file go? Now that I changed it. There it is. So if I go on, I'm going to go on with the same controller without using Asset Center, just to kind of show you how we can still track down who did what using Asset Center. So now I'm just going online here with the controller. And you've noticed in Asset Center, it's not checked out. It doesn't show anything, right? So somebody's going on there. And they can go in and make a change because I haven't set up security on it. All right, so I go in here, make a change. And again, this may not necessarily be any ill intent. Could just be somebody trying to fix something, get the line up and running. He had Studio 5000 on his laptop, didn't feel like going to the Asset Center client station or whatever the case may be. And he's gone in and made a change here. All right. So now how do we know that something happened there? Because there's nothing showing here. Well, there's various ways we can find out. So the first is we can go look at the audit logs. So maybe you're seeing the machine isn't working the way you thought it should be. You know, it's been working fine for a few days. All of a sudden, it's acting a little funny. And, you know, of course, nobody changed anything. We don't know. So we can go into the audit logs up here. And then there's various ways we can filter quickly on it. We can go at log time. You can just go here, the source, the resource. So in this case, I know it's version 31 test. So I just want to take a look quickly here at version 31 test. I can filter on that. And then my message column is kind of squished here, but I can scroll down, see the different things. Somebody went on, closed project, went offline. What's going on here? Modified rung. Somebody modified a rung. And then down here, I can see the text. The old text showed me that there was an AFI in the rung. And new neutral text here, the AFI is gone. So now I know somebody went in there. Well, who went in there? There's lab user on this computer, FTAC demo. All right, so now I can see who did what time. And now I can go ask the guy, hey, I noticed you made a change here. What happened? So let's say I don't see anything happening with the line. How do I know something was changed, right? Well, that's where scheduled searches come in. So we can set up a schedule, on a schedule, say weekly, daily, however you want to do it, per shift, on a certain resource or an individual, and see what changes were made that day, or in the case we can build the conditions. So I've just done a very simple one here. So I'm saying on this controller, version 31 test, I just want to see everything that happened in the last 2 hours, right? Now you might do 24 hours, a week, whatever the case may be, right? These can be run on a schedule or they can be run on demand, right? So if I just run it on demand, this shows me here, let me go width. This shows me in the last 2 hours, there's a total of 50 records for that controller. And same thing here now, I can scroll down, take a look, see what was going on in there. Oh, here we go, modified rung, all right, in routine. Same thing as we saw before in the logs, right? It'll give me the text, show me what's going on there. The third thing we can do is kind of the automated backup and compare of our devices, right? So again, it all depends on what makes sense for you. If you have controllers that hardly ever should have changes on them, maybe you do this less often. If it's common for people to be going in on a daily basis and tweaking things, then maybe you want to run this operation every night, right? But what we can do is go in and run a backup and compare. And again, I'll just do it on demand. And now what's happening here, see, it's loading the agent. So now the agent is going to go out, upload that controller file. It's going to get a copy of the master file from the database, the latest one, and it's going to run that compare tool in the background. And it's going to see, okay, are there any differences? If not, okay, fine, it'll let you know, no differences, everything's good. If there are differences, it's going to tell you. It'll generate a report showing you what those differences are. It can email them to whoever needs to get them emailed. And then you have a choice. You can either have it automatically check the file in as a new version, or if you want, if you maybe want to look at the changes first to see before you determine if that should be the latest version or not, you can do that. So in this case, it tells me the task is done. There's some differences found, right? So you would typically have that emailed to somebody, or we can just go in the event logs here. And this here, you'll notice a paper clip, so there's a little report. And now I get this compare report summary, right? So I can scroll down here, see all the differences. It tells me what I've filtered, what I'm looking for. It shows me the left side is my master file. My right side is my production file, so the online controller. And I can go down here. Oh, look, there's a ladder logic difference. All right. I keep going. Oh, in main program, main routine, I have a rung difference. And then at here, it'll actually show me the picture, right? So I can see in my master file, I had this AFI in there, and the online one, it's gone, right? So now I can actually see what happened there and when. So now if you wanted to see who did that, you'd have to go into the audit logs, going back to from when the last disaster recovery operation was done to see who actually went in and made that change, right? Now, what if we have somebody coming from outside? So say a contractor comes on with his own computer with Studio 5000 and he goes online. How can we determine that? The other one, with this one here, where I just opened it up on my computer and I went in and made changes, that works because, the person maybe was an employee using a work computer and it's on the same Factory Talk directory as everything else, so we can collect the audits from that software when he runs it. But if I come in from the outside, as I say, a Rockwell guy comes in and goes to work on your system, his laptop's not on your directory, so you're not going to get audits from his version of Studio 5000, right? So can we still figure out if somebody's going in there making changes? And the answer is yes. And what we can do is we can leverage what Paul talked about, that change detection built into the controller itself. We can actually use that in Asset Center. So what I can do is I can set up a change detect operation here for a controller as my L85. You see right now it says monitoring 1 of 1. So I'm monitoring a controller right now to see if there's any changes to that audit value, right? So if that audit value changed, I'm going to find out. So I'm just going to do one here where I change the key switch on the controller. If all goes well, there we go. So now it comes up, it says change detect in process, right? So it detected that I changed that key switch. And what's going to happen? Well, I can set up a timer here. Now, I've tweaked them down for demo purposes. You probably have them a little higher. But there's a controller idle time of 1 minute I've set. So now it detected a change, and it's going to wait 1 minute. If there's no other changes, it's going to now generate a report and email it to me. So within a minute, I'll know that somebody was on that controller, right? Now, if I kept making changes, if I'm online and I keep going, I can set a maximum runtime. So in this case, I've set it for 5 minutes. You'd probably have it like maybe an hour or something. If there's continuous changes being made, it's going to send you an email after this 5 minutes regardless, right? So I'll just wait here a minute. So this is a good idea to utilize because, again, even if it'll capture somebody who's not on your directory with another computer, or it captures something like the key switch change, right? Because in general, audits aren't going to capture that because there's no software involved, right? So that's where it comes in handy here. So go to my log, event log. And here I get a report. Key switch mode, it tells you what mode it was in, what it's changed to, what it is now, the time and date, and so on.
You can schedule all the controllers?
Yeah, so it has to support it. So it is version 20, version 20 L7s.
Yeah, that list of controllers that I had in there that supports that internal.
Yeah, if the controller supports the change detection, then you can put.
Being saved on the server.
Yeah, so there's actually an option when you do the setup. So see it here. So there's actually an option, copy controller log to audit log. So I have it set to true. So if I do that, it will copy that controller audit log to the Asset Center. There'll be some duplication perhaps between the software audits, but it's still easier because if you turn that off, then you won't capture, you won't capture it in the audit log. So usually I just keep it on. So another thing I just want to show, as of Factory Talk View version 11, on our Trend Pro object, we can now plot audits from Asset Center on the trend. So this can come in handy, again, if you're doing some diagnostics. If I look, say, last hour, I'm going to have to do more than an hour. 6 hours. What happened? You can do if you're looking at some process trends for whatever your process might be, and you see some anomaly as you're looking at the trend, right? You know, a gap or flat lines, you go, that doesn't look right. I mean, you could just basically look at the time range, then go back to the audit logs to see if something happened. But what we can do now is we can actually just look straight down here, these little check marks, and I can go in and see exactly any audits that occurred at that time. So if somebody turned a motor off or whatever, that's going to show up right here on the trend, right? So that's something we added as of version 11 of USE. Version 10, we added the ability to add alarms to these plots as well, so, right? So it just saves you from having to go to multiple places to do diagnostics. And just the last thing I want to show is, again, maybe we want to control who can do what in these assets, right? So right now I've got it wide open. I can check out any file, check in any file, but maybe I want to restrict that access. So things I can do, for example, let me go into design mode here. I can set up security here. Now I have administrators, I give them full privileges. And then my other users, I've kind of done some restrictions. So I can set up here configuring security, who can do deletions, read, write, and so on. On the Asset Center side, I can determine who can do checkouts, check-ins, gets, labels. There's all kinds of stuff here. Undo checkouts, set working folders. So there's a lot of stuff we can set security in there as well. So for example, I have AC test and emulate. If I log off as an administrator, so let me log back on as a basic user. Oops, wrong password. So notice now for AC test, if I want to go check that file out, I click on it, it's grayed out. So we're saying this person can't check files out. He can do a get, so maybe he just wants to look at something or he just needs to download to the controller. He can do that, but he can't make any edits to the file. Then I had another one here called emulate, which is gone. I said, I don't even want him to see that one. He has no business being in there, so let's just keep it off his radar altogether. So we can tune the security settings for this as well here in Asset Center. So that's all I really wanted to show. Like I said, I just wanted to walk through some scenarios that you could encounter in your plant and show you how we use Asset Center to address those things there. Any questions about anything I've shown or Paul talked about? Or yep.
Can you check in or check out any files with different extensions? Doesn't have to be controllers. Like,
yeah.
For instance, I was thinking about it yesterday actually with some of the engineers in the plant. An AutoCAD, let's say the process PNID.
Yep.
You know, everybody has it in different places. If you have, especially an organization that has 5 different engineers and everybody does a change and saves it somewhere else.
Yep.
So can we do that?
Sure.
AutoCAD file.
Yeah. So like here, I just got, say, here I just use your documents. I did a PDF, right?
Okay.
It can be any file. So there's different ways to do it. What it does is when you do a checkout, it goes from the SQL database. It does a copy of the file to somewhere on your local computer, right? So you could either just, you check it out, then you go to that directory and launch it from AutoCAD, or you can actually set up, here, let me find it, file associations. You can set up file associations here. So whatever the AutoCAD extension is, you just tell it what program is used to launch it. So you can put that in. So these are default ones that we have, but you can put your own in there. So when you do the checkout, it'll automatically launch AutoCAD with the file and so on, right? So you can configure that. I've just kind of covered some Rockwell devices, but there's things here like remote file share, remote computer disaster recovery. So you have a file share somewhere, you can set that up to do automated backups of that file share. FTP server. A lot of robots, the way you communicate, like with a Fanic robot or whatever, it's through FTP. So there is a generic FTP device, but that could just be an FTP server, any FTP server, right, with multiple documents in it. So we can have binders that actually have multiple documents. So when you check out the file, you're actually checking out a folder with a bunch of documents, right? Like even our connected components workbench now with a drive, if you're configuring a drive, it's no longer just one config file, like the old Drive Executive had a DNO file. Now with Connected Component Workbench, there's a bunch of files, project files associated with that, right? So it'll actually store it, everything in a folder here, right? So here's, for example, a PowerFlex. Scrolling to me. what a PowerFlex drive backup file looks like, right? There's a bunch of files in here.
So when it comes to editing, you're editing files, it depends on your security. Is it the first person in who gets to edit that file? Anybody else then tries to edit that file at the same time?
Right, so as soon as I check the file out, it will show that the file's checked out, and if anybody else tries, like it just won't. The checkout thing will be grayed out. They won't even be able to check the file out. They can just get a read-only copy. Now they could change that read-only copy, but they can't check it back in, right? They could put it on their own computer and make changes to it, but they won't be able to check that file back in.
Okay, so what happens if somebody leaves that file?
And they don't check it back in. Right, so there's something called undo checkout. So if I check a file out here, and then I just go home and I leave it checked out and the next guy needs it, there's something called undo checkout. So by default, it's wide open, so you'd want to tighten this. Like you don't want everybody to be able to just undo checkouts, but maybe one person per shift or some supervisor has the ability to go in and he can undo the checkout, or he and she can undo the checkout. And then it'll release the.
Can they view that checked out file and compare?
So what happens is when the person checks the file out, it's taking a copy from the master database, from the SQL database, and putting it on their local computer. So if he's gone and made changes and then shut his computer down, you can't see it. As soon as you undo the checkout, though, so he's made changes. Those aren't stored yet in the master database because he hasn't checked the file back in. So you're going to get the last good configuration. When the guy comes in the next morning and somebody's undid the checkout, now he can't check that file back in anymore, right? He's going to have to go get a checkout again and put his modifications in there or whatever, right?
No, you can go to the design mode and drop it as a new file.
You'd have to change, completely, but hopefully you don't have everybody able to do that. Yeah, typically what you would want to do is check out, especially if you have a lot of versions already. So 23, you'd probably want to just get 23 again and put his changes in there and check it in as a new file again. But yeah, there is a methodology to look after that because it's going to happen that somebody's going to forget. There's actually a built-in search. It's already done there. It's a default one. Checked out files. Right, so it's a simple, you create a new one. It's one of the, where did I do it? Archive checkout status. So I can run a report even once a day at the end of the shift just to see if anybody's left anything checked out, right, or in the morning or whatever. So there's actually a built-in report already for that, because it is common. Anything else? Good. All right. So anything else? If there are any other questions further on, contact whoever you deal with at Gerrie, and if you need any more in-depth stuff about Asset Center, there's a lot more here. Obviously, I'm just trying to address some of the basic scenarios you might run across. They can certainly engage us, help you out.
Okay, well, we're about right on time. So thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoyed it.